Welcome to Your Iconic Image. If you want to take control of your image and be a power player in your space, then this is the show for you. Here we will arm you with tools and information to help you grow your brand on purpose. I'm your host, Marlana Semenza, photographer and visual strategist. Now let's dive into today's episode. Jerome Myers is the preeminent authority of dream realization. A believer that dreams can and should be real, he is the founder of Myers Methods, Chief Inspiration Officer of Dreamcatchers, and has been featured in Black Enterprise, Business Insider, and numerous podcasts. Welcome, Jerome.
Thank you for having me, Marlana. Or Marlana, I'm sorry.
Actually, no, you had it right. Marlana.
Oh, okay.
You're one of the few people that got it right on the first try. So let's talk about dreams.
Ooh.
Why do you think people struggle to follow their dreams or make their dreams a reality?
Because they're taught to be practical. The people around them typically want to protect them from having disappointment. And then protecting them from having the disappointment, they keep them from stretching and growing and potentially failing. And I put air quotes around failing because I don't think you actually fail unless you give up.
Very true. So how much of it is personal mindset as well?
I think the mindset that we adopt usually comes from what is given to us. So I personally believe until we make a deliberate decision to live a life where we've actually chosen to set our reality is programmed for us. And it's usually programmed from a child. And so what I find a lot with folks that I work with is they made up their mind who they were going to be when they were somewhere between 8 and 12 years old. And they're continuing to live that out. And all the programming that they had as a child is still kind of hardwired into what they are, who they are, and what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. And unless they had some really tough moment in their life where they started to question everything that was given to them, they haven't done a reflection to really know what they feel and believe and hold to be true.
So then how do we start to break that?
So I think we start to break that by first asking some really tough questions. And I go all the way down to foundational. For a lot of people, that's some form of spiritual practice, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or Islam or whatever it is. And asking, do you believe whatever you practice as a child? I think what happens very often is we just adopt the things that were done around us and we continue to practice those rituals or habits as we get older and we never actually question them. And one of the favorite ways I like to demonstrate this is what happens when somebody sneezes. Most people say bless you. Well, why do they say bless you? And does it make you a rude person if you choose not to say bless you when somebody sneezes? I personally don't bless people when they sneeze because I think that was created because people used to think that your heart stopped when you sneeze. And that's just not a scientific fact. And so why are we still continuing that practice or ritual? And that's just at a really high level. If I want to get personal with the listeners, and I suspect that all of them don't have a really healthy diet. And somebody's listening is probably got a soda and maybe had some fried chicken. And I suspect that they potentially said grace before they ate their food. And so the act of saying grace was done to, I guess, make sure that the food was going to be clean and not harm them. But anytime you eat stuff that's not good for your arteries or high in sodium or high in sugar, then in essence, you're not taking care of yourself. You're poisoning yourself. And so the two behaviors back to back just seem really silly. But I'm from the South, and it's very common to have a pop or a soda and fried chicken or fried pork chops or something like that. And I think everybody would agree that it's probably not the best food that you could put in your body.
True. Tasty, however, but not the best thing for you.
Extremely tasty. That's why we continue to eat it.
So how much of it then is taking a deeper look into the origin of and the basis of what we have been taught to think about ourselves or think about what we should be doing?
Yeah, so I think when you get ready to make the transformation, the first piece is awareness, right? It being aware that there is something different. And I think everybody has these small periods. I wanted to call them spats, but you have these short periods where you start asking questions like, is this it? Is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? Do I really believe that? And there's just this disconnect between what you think should be and what is. And what traditionally happens is we just ignore that, right? We just let it go. And we just continue to do anything because that's a habit that we've created. And we just continue to practice our habits, and our habits make our life. But if you actually feel that, and you decide to explore it, I call it going down a rabbit hole, right? If you go down a rabbit hole and you start looking around and you start pulling on the wires and see what's really hardwired and what's loosely connected, I think you will find that a lot of the things that appear to be super locked in, hardwired, are really loose. And I think my favorite example of this will be, and again, in the South, people will wrap a chain around a gate and they won't actually put a lock on the end of the gate or the end of the chain. And so anybody who's walking by will see the chain, and a lot of folks will assume, hey, that's locked. We don't need to worry about it. But there are people who actually go up and they look at the chain. It's like, oh, just unravel it, open the gate, and we can go in. And that right there is like, I think the secret to the people who achieve crazy success and those who end up living a pretty mediocre life. They just assume that something's locked and don't even try to figure out if they can get in.
Interesting. I remember hearing something similar about elephants also, that the chains that they use to keep these elephants in place, the elephant could easily break, but since it's been taught since it was a baby that it can't, it never tries. So I think
Yeah, I
it's
don't
a
think
similar thing.
we don't ever really understand our power until we choose to explore it, right? And this goes back to the kind of defeatist mentality that we were talking about earlier. If the elephant really explores its power, then it will see what it can do. But it's already made up its mind that it won't be successful at that. So it doesn't even try.
So let's pull on that for a second. What about self-worth? How how does that play into all of this?
So I boil down self-worth and self-esteem, and some people may say they're different. I think they're very similar. And for us, that's level one of the red pill, right? And the self-esteem or the self-worth really just goes back to your ability to keep promises to yourself. So if you make a commitment to yourself and you follow through on it, it's a deposit in the account. Every time that you don't, it's a withdrawal. And I found that most people are really good at keeping other folks accountable, but they don't do a good job of keeping themselves accountable. And so they're constantly withdrawing from that bank that they have. And when they withdraw from the bank enough, it ends up being defunct, right? There's nothing else to pull from it. And so when they're counting on themselves to do something and they don't have anything in that account to pull from, then they decide that they can't or won't do it. And
Mm,
you start stacking that up time after time, and it will just make you feel like you're worthless, and then you're helpless, and that helplessness requires you to have other people go do the thing for you that you could potentially go do for yourself. And again, when you start stacking all these layers up, you end up in a place where you've built this prison around you that you can't get out of without a little bit of help. And
mm,
so setting up your day, I think the best thing you can do is set up your day where you have a win as soon as you get out of bed, like within 5 minutes. It can be something as simple as making the bed, right? It can be brushing your teeth. It can be whatever you want it to be. But just having a win where I promised myself I was going to do this and I did it. And you do that every day and you start building on that, you create momentum, and that momentum keeps going. And that is what I think actually gives you the opportunity to change your life, because now you see yourself as somebody who is accountable. And when you're accountable to yourself, your ability to hold other people accountable is really easy. And the other thing is, other people will be more accountable to you when they know that you're an accountable person because they don't want to let you down.
mm. Now, wrapped up in there, I think I also have to ask you about forgiveness. So let's say we want to achieve something, and for one reason or another, we are unable to do that. I think also too, you had said that we hold other people more accountable than we hold ourselves. I think we tend to forgive others more readily than we forgive ourselves. So where does that come into play?
So the thing with forgiveness for ourselves is we actually know how hard we tried and what our true intention was, right? There is no ability to lie to yourself because you are the decision maker in the process. With other people, we can give them the benefit of the doubt. And so even if they intended to do it, sometimes we assume that they did, and then that allows us to move on more quickly. But at the end of the day, whether they intended to or not, the forgiveness is for you. It's not for them,
Mhm.
right? And the other piece that I think a lot of people miss is people like being the victim, right? Because they feel like it puts them in a position of power against the other person. Well, you owe me because you did X, right? And at the end of the day, you're giving your power away. You're giving it to everybody else when you sit in that position versus saying, no, I forgive you. We can move forward. And whether you're moving forward with yourself because, hey, you made a commitment and you didn't follow through on it, but maybe you can try again or make it up in some other way to yourself or somebody else doing it. We're all relating together, and that relationship with yourself again is most important. But then the next layer, and it's funny that you're kind of walking me through this, the second layer of the red pill is relationships, right? And so you fix the way you relate with yourself, and then that changes the way you relate with others. And the thing that we like to say is, you want mutually beneficial relationships. You What I found with the people who perform at the highest levels is they have a bunch of one-way relationships. People come to them to get things and then they leave. They don't bring anything with them when they come. For the folks who are in the other end of the spectrum and have low self-esteem, low self-worth, they're giving everything they can away with the hope that people will find them worthy instead of having a reciprocal relationship or mutually beneficial where they're getting stuff coming back to them. In both cases, those people end up drained, right?
Mm,
But the folks who have the healthiest relationships have the mutual benefit and they're being filled while they're giving and they end up in a space of abundance.
mm. So a couple of things. The first thing is you had mentioned um, when we kind of put the blame on other people. Do you think that sometimes we do that so it is easier for us to say, well, no, I wasn't able to achieve this dream or this goal because of this person or that person. And by giving them the power, we don't have to hold ourselves as accountable.
It's not my fault, right? And we did
Right.
the same thing with religion. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Liz Gilbert, but she wrote a really cool book. And basically, everybody said, hey, so what are you going to do now that you've kind of peaked in your career? Like, you won't ever be able to top what happened with this other thing that you did. And she was talking about how a lot of the creatives had these really, really tough situations where they ended up dying from overdoses on drugs and other things because the weight of their kind of peaking and the weight of them needing to achieve a new level of success was so heavy that they couldn't handle it. And she introduced the concept that uh, people were just they were just channeling the creative through them. So they weren't actually responsible for the labor of creating the work. And that was to separate them from, all of that pressure because they weren't able to cope and handle it.
Mhm.
Some people use this in a space of religion as well, where it's like, oh, I'm waiting for the creator or God or whatever, whoever you pray to fix this for me, versus me taking responsibility for it and doing everything that I can in order to affect the result that I'm looking for. I think there's two very different schools of thoughts. Jocko Willink talks about extreme ownership. There's other folks who talk about surrendering to the process. And I think the truth is somewhere in between those where you're accepting of the process if you've done everything that you can do and it's still not working, but you're still doing all that you can. And so in that, you're taking the extreme ownership.
Mhm. Agreed. And, another thing that you had touched on was about bringing things to the relationships. And I think that's another thing that a lot of people, even especially in businesses, they They give things away, and that's okay as long as you are still getting something in return. So
Yeah.
what are you getting in return? It might be just that it feeds your heart, but there has to be something that you're getting in return. It doesn't always have to be monetary, but there's got to be something.
There has to be an exchange. Like in order for something to have value, there has to be an exchange of things that the two people value.
Mhm.
And you can make that whatever it is. But if you're in business, then traditionally the way that that is uh, measured is by, the service being rendered.
Right. Okay, so let me then ask, what if we're having trouble defining our dreams or haven't yet defined our dream? Is there something that we can do to help us do that?
Yes. My favorite thing to tell people to do is sit in the quiet, right? If you're not spending quiet time with yourself every day, like, and I'm not 5 minutes, I'm talking, something more significant, something north of 15 minutes. So I think 15 to 30 minutes is probably optimal. But if you're not spending just silent time with yourself on a daily basis, you don't have a chance to hear the inner voice, right? A lot of people walk, as soon as they walk in the house, they grab the remote, they turn the TV on, or they turn on radio, or they turn something on. They are scared to be by themselves and alone in their thoughts. And a great way to do this, if you have some form of a commute, is do the commute without a radio on or music playing or podcast or whatever you may be consuming, and just allow your thoughts to come up. And if you spend enough time with yourself, the voice will tell you what it is, and it'll
Mm,
make it very clear. And I suspect that everybody actually knows what it is. It's just they don't want to hear it, right? They're like, no, I don't like that. That's not good enough. Or I don't like that. It's going to be too uncomfortable. Or whatever it is, whatever the reason is. And again, if you listen to the voice, if you find quiet, you will find the answers to all the questions that you have.
Do you think people struggle more with it's not good enough or big enough or that it's too big?
I don't know. Well, I have a hypothesis, and I don't know that it's true, but I think we live in a world where the majority of folks are okay being mediocre. And so it's probably too big,
Mhm.
right? But when the people that I tend to spend the most time with are folks who want to impact the world in a major way. And so what I hear most often is, oh, that's not big enough. That can't be it. There's got to be something bigger for me. But for the masses, I do think, oh, that's intimidating. Why would I want a big, hairy, audacious goal? I want something that's attainable and practical and reasonable. And it's not inspiring. That's why they don't take action on it.
Mm. So let's say it is a big dream.
Mhm.
In your experience, do you reverse engineer things? Do you set
Absolutely.
little goals along the way?
Yeah, so it starts with the end, right? And I like to talk about this like somebody that's going on a trip, on a vacation. And so you're gonna go somewhere, you know where that place is, and then you figure out how you're gonna get there, and you have the milestones along the way for that. And that's just to show that you're making progress. And as you make more progress, usually the milestones get bigger, and you can look back to see, oh man, I've come so far. I need to keep going. And then once you get to the place that you want to go, of course, there's other things that you have to figure out. Here's the thing that I've learned though, those milestones are extremely important because it usually takes longer and costs more, whether it's time or talent or treasure, to get to the place that you are aspiring to go to. And you look back across those milestones and you see how far you've come, which encourages you to keep going because you can say, well, I've done that and I've done this. And I David Goggins calls it the cookie jar. It's your ability to reach in a cookie jar and say, okay, I've seen this before and I can beat it.
Hmm. Do you think enough people take the time to look back and see how far they've come?
it so do I think enough people do it? No, because I think everybody should do it, right?
Mm,
Most folks aren't reflective. They don't think about the future or the past. All they're obsessed with the present, and it's always an emergency and just running from one fire to the other. There's not a whole lot of strategy in it. And they're overwhelmed, and because of that, they can't really spend time thinking about either or. when you're reflective, you're able to slow it down. And then slowing down the time, you're able to be extremely strategic. And that ability to be strategic allows you to be a whole lot more deliberate in your action and push away all of the distractions that are out there.
Mm.
Those things that are just showing up and creating a headache for us when there's so many other things that we should be spending our time
How about the power of no?
on. So I spent some time with somebody who recently said, look, it's either hell yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was like, man, and I talked to another guy yesterday. He said, I basically say no to everything at this point, right? The only things I'm doing are those things that I'm setting priority for. And the person is extremely wealthy and lives a life second to none. And I was like, when you get to the place where you're clear about where you're going and what you're supposed to be working on, it gets so much easier to decide what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing.
Mm.
And that right there is magical because you're now free, right? Making this one decision frees up 1,000 other decisions.
So true. So true. What if we have more than one dream? Do we tackle one first or do you kind of multitask it? What's your advice?
So multitasking typically doesn't work, and sequence is extremely important. I think traditionally what happens is the dreams will stack on top of each other if you spend enough time looking at them. And so the person that you have to become to fulfill that first dream is going to be necessary for you to do the other one because it's those skill sets are compounding, they're cumulative, and very little things happen in parallel and don't need the skills from one dream to the next.
Hmm. And we talked about saying no. What about hearing no?
So I believe no is the beginning of the negotiation. Until somebody says no, then there is nothing to overcome. And I think the conflict is the beauty of life. If everybody agrees about everything, then the other folks aren't necessary because you already have the answer. It's when there's conflict, there's diverse opinions, there's uh, maybe conflicting ideas that are in play that you arrive at a better solution.
Mm.
And the solution can be whatever, but what matters most is that your ego is out of the way and you're convinced that you're getting to the best solution and not being right. That's the difference maker. Getting to the best solution instead of being right.
Love that. So along the way, what was your biggest hurdle?
Ooh, I, I don't know if we can go for a few hours, but if I had to pick one, I would say, man, man, oh man. So back in 2010, I realized that I wasn't living the life that I should be living. I was in a pretty bad car accident 5 years prior. And when I started asking myself really tough questions, I realized that I hadn't actually utilized what I consider to be the second chance that I was given to live. I mean, I was in a head on accident with a dump truck, and I was told I was dead by somebody at the accident scene, even though I was there and fully conscious. And so when I started thinking about that, it began to weigh on me. And I had to redefine the way that I thought about my experience and how people were going to experience me. And I spent my life up until that point working really hard to please other people. And it took that epiphany for me to realize the power of no and some of these other amazing concepts that you've pulled out throughout this conversation. And in making that change, it set some people back because they weren't used to hearing or seeing those words or activities from me or
Mm.
behaviors.
So if somebody wants to, they're listening to this, they're inspired, they want to start putting things in place to live their dream, what's the one step that they can take right now?
Get to the quiet space and listen. And it won't happen the first day because you've still got all the noise. You've got all the self-talk. You're questioning whether or not it's actually going to work. You don't fully believe in it. And if you stay rigorous, you stay in the ritual, you stay in the habit, you'll start to get these little things that begin to pull on you. You begin to notice things that you were totally oblivious to before, and you will start to see the signs that are pointing you to the destiny that you were placed here to do. And that right there is the magic of life.
Love that. And with that, Jerome, I just have 4 final questions for you. First
Let's
one
do
was, what was the best piece of advice you were ever given?
it. um, I guess you didn't ask me for the first piece that came to mind. The best piece was dreams should be real.
Share with us one thing on your bucket list.
Jumping out of an airplane into a stadium full of people for a conference that I organized.
Oh my. You lost me at jumping out of the airplane. When the toy companies get around to making an action figure of you, what 2 accessories will it come with?
A Lamborghini Aventador. That's a car for the folks who don't like cars. And this is so good.
You could have one in a couple of colors if you want.
No. So I'm going to a couple of different places, and the issue is this, right? I believe that there's one law, and the law is love. And I'm trying to pick the accessory that is actually going to allow that to ruminate throughout the world. And I haven't ever seen something like it, right? Like initially it was like, man, I should just like say a heart, right? Because everybody recognizes the heart as love. But I really think it's like a little teddy bear, right? So somebody can hug it and feel better about it. Because like when I think of superheroes, I think of like firefighters and police officers, and I think of the little kid who's shocked because there's some traumatic event, and they always have like a blankie or a teddy bear, and they give it to them, and that gives them the peace, right? That comfort in a scary situation is what the superheroes are for. And so it's the Lamborghini Aventador and a teddy bear.
Love that. That's beautiful. And the last thing, how do people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn every day trying to put some positivity out into the world and challenge people to live out their best lives.
Love it. Thank you so very much for being here, Jerome.
So glad to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Once again, I'm Marlana Semenza, photographer and visual strategist. Please comment, like, or share this episode, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. For more information on how I can help you create your iconic image, visit marlanasemenza.com.